First of all, congratulations to the Energy Storage Coalition for organizing the event on repowering Ukraine and organizing it this time. I think it's a really important topic and the timing is really very good. So I'm very happy to contribute to that. What I'll present here is based on our work that we presented first here in Brussels, actually, in September. This is a report written in September about Ukraine's energy security and the coming, well, at the time was coming, now it's the current winter. This was presented by our Executive Director, Dr. Fatih Birol, together with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, to make sure it would receive sufficient attention. Because we really think this is an important topic. In fact, as an organization, the IEA, we're focused on energy security next to decarbonization. This is for us the #1 energy security challenge globally at this moment in time. So it's really important, and we want to stress that. What we cover in the report are the 3 main areas, and you'll see some overlap with what Markus Lippold told you. Electricity as the main one, the main challenge, natural gas, and also heating. The report focuses on Ukraine. I'll speak mainly about Ukraine because that's the focus here. We also do include a section on Moldova, because Moldova is in a difficult position as well for somewhat different reasons than Ukraine. It's tightly linked, the energy system, to the situation in Ukraine, so it's really important to not forget about Moldova. It's a report from September. We updated it somewhat. We can't do the analysis every single week. We've seen significant repairs happening in Ukraine since the update that we provided in September, but then also massive attacks continuing with drones, with missile strikes from Russia, which means that even more capacity, both generation and transmission, was actually damaged in the meantime. The report is based on a mission that we carried out in July to Kiev, where we had the opportunity to speak to a number of Ukrainian stakeholders. Of course, the Ministry of Energy, the energy community has a local office there, Naftogaz, and also the Kiev School of Economics, who's very well informed on the situation in Ukraine. We took the opportunity to run 2 workshops there, one on power system modeling. Now, power system modeling is complex as it is. It's additionally complexity in Ukraine has 2 aspects. One is limited data availability because for good reasons, they don't want to make all the data available. But second, also the situation changes literally from day to day. It's a really complex thing to do. So we're interacting with the stakeholders there to see how we can provide, let's say, a reasonable estimate of the Ukrainian model power system to understand what the possibilities are. Because without a model, it's difficult to see how you can improve the situation over time. And the other one is battery storage, because it's a relatively new topic in Ukraine. We think it has an important role to play in providing more resilience to the system. So we want to bring that to Kiev to discuss it there with DTEC and with the other Ukrainian energy stakeholders. You may see also in the photos Deputy Minister Roman Andarak of Energy, who was there. We had the pleasure to meet him there. The backdrop then was there were already rolling blackouts. We're only in Kiev at the time. We saw lots of diesel generators to make sure the electricity was locally, let's say, available. But this was July. I mean, July, it was pretty hot, actually. That was still doable. Of course, the winter situation is very different. So let's go into the findings one by one, and then after that, I'll come to the recommendations, starting with the most important part, namely the power sector. Ukrainian power system traditionally, let's say pre-full-scale invasion, half of it is nuclear generation capacity. This is generation capacity. Half of it is traditionally nuclear. A quarter is coal. About 10% is gas, and then the rest is other ways of generating electricity. And you see very clearly the first bar here. This is 2022 before the full-scale invasion. This is the generation capacity that Ukraine had available at the time before they were fully attacked. And then you see it going down 23, 24. And the last update we did, the estimate we made is for the summer of 24, where they had about 1/3 of the original generation capacity left. That's only generation capacity. I'm not even talking about the damage to transmission lines, to substations, which also limits the possibility of using this additional, the 1/3 that was left. You can't even use all of that. Part of it is damaged, part of it is occupied. So it's a really tough situation. If you look at the cost, we estimate, the costs are estimated about $11 billion in terms of the damage done. If you were to rebuild it, let's say, in the original state, which is not our recommendation, it would easily cost $30 billion. It's a massive amount of damage and a massive investment which will be needed over time to rebuild it. We can rebuild in a better way than the original state. What makes it even more difficult is the deficit that Ukraine has been facing and will face in the coming period. And here we compare 2 periods. One in the left is the summer period, where you see the peak demand for electricity It's an estimate, and then the available supply. In light blue, you see the part that Ukraine produces itself, so produced inside Ukraine, still available at the time. The dark blue part is what they import from the EU, from the neighboring EU member states. At the time, our best estimate was that the deficit, so what they're missing in peak times, was about 2.3 gigawatts. The way you manage that is through rolling blackouts. It means you don't have enough power generation available to supply electricity to the demand at each moment in time, and you have to have rolling blackouts to manage the deficit. Again, in summer that is manageable, but in the winter period, we estimate that the peak demand goes up significantly, even with some ongoing repairs. And you see that in the right-hand side, where we estimate that supply would be a bit more actually than was available in the summer due to the repairs. We see a much bigger deficit in the winter period, towards 6 gigawatts. For comparison, that's the normal demand of electricity in Denmark. So it's really a quite significant amount. What has been really important is the interconnection capacity. That's a dark blue part you saw on the previous side between Ukraine, or Ukraine and Moldova, I should say, and the EU member states. And this provides a historical picture of how Ukraine has used interconnection capacity over time, going back all the way to, 2019, I think. So before the war, you see the different important neighboring actors, let's say, in the different colors. Blue is the EU. Gray is Belarus. Red is Russia, orange is Moldova. Those are the entities they were trading with. The left-hand side is the part before the invasion, but also before the full-time synchronization between Ukraine and the European continental grid. And then you see on the top, the positive part, let's say, those are the exports from the Ukrainian perspective. So it means Ukraine is exporting if it's blue, to the EU. Below the bar, the negative part, let's say, are the imports where Ukraine was importing in the past. And you see that in the left-hand side of the chart, they were importing mainly actually from Belarus. They were from the Soviet legacy. They were interconnected with Belarus and the Russian system. That was one of the main imports, but they were already exporting to the EU and a bit to Moldova. Then, as it happens, on the day of the invasion, the Ukrainian system was on isolation mode. This was planned. There was a planned test in the process of becoming independent from the synchronization with Russia and Belarus and towards synchronization with the EU. And it happened to be the test phase on the day of the invasion. Of course, it didn't synchronize back to Belarus and Russia, so they remained in isolation mode. And Ukraine asked for an emergency synchronization with the continental grid. Now, this is a process that NSOE plans carefully because it has certain risks and you have to manage it properly. And normally this takes, the overall process takes years, and what was remaining there takes months. They asked for synchronization within, days or weeks, and to the credit of the TSOs, Ukrenergo, the neighboring TSOs, NSOE and the Commission, they did an amazing job. They compressed the timeline from months into weeks without any fault in the system. It was really very impressive. What you see happening after that, so after the dotted line, then we are in a new situation. We have synchronization of the Ukrainian grid with the EU continental system. You see initially that Ukraine in 22 in particular, is still exporting. It's still on the positive side, exporting to blue, exporting to the EU. So it's contributing basically to the EU, power supply. But then it changes as the Russian attacks intensify, as Ukraine loses more and more of its generation capacity. You see that they have to import initially the smaller parts below the bar, the blue part, and then here in the summer of 24, significant part up to the limit of what is technically available in terms of interconnection capacity. That means that the issue of interconnection capacity, which already mentioned previously, becomes a really important one because this is one of the additional means that Ukraine has and is relatively safe. This is something that Russia so far has not dared to attack. So it's something that we can provide from the EU side. And just to mention as well, NSOE has actually increased the firm export capacity from the neighboring member states to Ukraine from 1.7 to 2.1 gigawatts for the period starting in this month from December to March. So they are trying to increase to the maximum amount possible the firm interconnection capacity. Let's move from power to heating. Ukraine has a significant district heating network, which provides heat to mainly to cities. It has also been repeatedly targeted by Russian forces since the full-scale invasion. And this is, of course, also highly disruptive in winter period. It's really a means to increase the stress on the population. We've not seen significant losses in the two previous winters, and also the two previous winters happened to be relatively mild. So yes, there were damages, but it was not that serious. we do see that it's now getting more serious. We can see more serious damages. If you count them, there's a number of 18 large-scale combined heat and power plants which have been damaged, 800 boiler houses, 350 kilometers of district heating pipeline. The numbers add up because these are local networks. These are not national networks, they're local. What you see on the map here is the average number of days where the daily minimum temperature is below freezing. So it shows you basically how cold these areas get in the winter. And you'll see that the northeastern part, which to some extent overlaps with the front line, is actually the part which is called the darkest color. It's the coldest part. This is where they're most vulnerable for disruptions to the district heating network. Then let's talk about gas as the third and final part of the energy sector that we looked into. This shows, and again, it's a longer historical timeline, three things. One, in the bottom, starting from the lower part, is the Ukrainian domestic gas production. That's the dark, blue line. In the middle, the light blue one, that is Ukrainian gas demand. You see the production has remained pretty much stable, despite part of it being located in the east of the country, so very close to the front line. But demand, the light blue one, has been going down significantly because of demand destruction, because of the damages to industry, because of, no longer the possibility to produce under proper circumstances. The top one, the purple one, this is the Ukrainian gas transit. That's gas transiting through Ukraine. It's not used inside Ukraine. It's from Gazprom going through Ukraine and delivered to, European customers. You see it significantly going down in 22. That's when Gazprom stopped delivering gas by and large to Europe, but there's still a part remaining. The part that remains is based on a transit contract which expires by the end of this month. And also the interconnection agreement between Gazprom and, the Ukrainian gas system expires by the end of the month. Ukraine has said we will not negotiate a new contract for obvious reasons. And that means that in all likelihood, in our base case scenario, we assume there'll be no more Russian transit after the 1st of January. Now, to put it into context, we have been through significant reductions of Russian gas before. That was a big price shock. This is not comparable. We're talking about 6 BCM, billion cubic meters, for the first quarter of 2025. Yes, it's noticeable. No, it's not comparable to what happened 2 years ago. It affects mainly Austria, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Hungary, and they could see it coming miles away. This is not something new. It's not a shock. It's people knew already 10 years ago. Well, not true, 2 years ago, they knew that a contract would expire. They could prepare. There's storages in the region. There's LNG facilities, both north and south of Europe. There are alternatives available. You may have to pay an additional price to make sure you attract that gas. So the gas could become a bit more expensive, but there is enough gas also for the region for this winter. Then to wrap up our energy action plan. And just to say, this is what we published in September. Many of these points are not particularly new. We know that many of these things are actually already happening, but as was mentioned before, not everything is happening at the right speed. And we really wanted to press these points and say, this is urgent, this is important, and it needs to happen at speed. So to go through them, first of all, of course, bolster the physical and cybersecurity of Ukraine's critical infrastructure. This is crucial. Without that, you can invest and rebuild as much as you want, but it won't last. The delivery of the equipment and spare parts, which is already happening, and for instance, the energy community is doing a great job in coordinating this. It needs to be expedited. There's a long list of needs that Ukraine has, technical needs, which need to be delivered upon. Decentralize the power supply. There are possibilities to build back better and more resilient. There's both renewables and batteries, but it's also small-scale gas-fired power plants. It's diesel generators. It's anything that can work at this moment, basically. The transmission capacity between the EU and Ukraine, that's the one I spoke about before, where NSOE has already increased the capacity to 2.1 gigawatt. It could maybe be increased even more, so it's important to remain vigilant and see what can be done. Energy savings and demand response, maybe not an obvious one, but still, especially in the heating side, there's significant inefficiencies in Ukraine. There are things that can be done to save on energy. Backup options for winter heating. This is gas in storage, but it's also LPG heating facilities. It could be biomass, wood. There are different options available. Natural gas storage levels. Ukraine has significant storage capacity in the western part of the country, also used by EU shippers. This is what you can use to prepare for the winter to make sure there's sufficient gas available. But again, gas is not the main problem as far as we can see. And then, of course, having the gas import capacities. In a normal winter, Ukraine would be self-sufficient when it comes to gas. If it's a really cold winter, they may need to import a bit, and then you need the import capacities to be available. Don't forget about Moldova. Moldova is dependent on one big gas-fired power generation plant in Transnistria, which runs on Russian gas. If there's no more transit, there's no more cheap gas to that part of Moldova, which means there's no more, let's say, reasonably priced electricity to the rest of Moldova. And that could be a big social issue, not just an energy issue, but also a big social issue. And then in the end, working towards a modern, market-based, resilient and sustainable Ukrainian energy system, of course, in line with the EU acquis. The more it integrates with the EU acquis, the more it's in line with the rules that we know here inside the EU, the easier it will be to have the proper investment taking place and to also integrate it after the war finally will be over. That'll be my presentation. Thank you for your attention.